I have been to a great many dinners I did not want to attend, and I have written about a great many evenings I promptly forgot. That is the honest biography of a music journalist at the end of a long career. You go where the calendar sends you, you eat the rubber chicken, you note down whatever passes for news, and you drive home in the dark with nothing left in you but the hum of an engine and the faint guilt of a man who once loved music desperately, and somewhere along the way learned to file copy instead. My name is Phineas Oakes. I spent 41 years reviewing concerts, recitals, competitions, and galas for 3 separate publications, and I will tell you plainly, by the night in question, I was finished with being moved. I thought I was, anyway. I was wrong in a way I have not recovered from, and I do not expect to. The Caldwell Conservatory held its annual patrons' dinner on the 3rd Thursday of October, in the grand dining room on the building's east wing. A long, high-ceilinged hall with oil portraits of dead benefactors along the walls and a chandelier that had witnessed, I would estimate, 60 years of mediocre speeches and overcooked beef. I had covered 9 of these dinners. I came because my editor asked me to, because Sir Edmund Crail was that year's guest of honor, and because there was a rumor, the kind of rumor that keeps aging journalists shuffling out of the house, that the conservatory's newest intake included a prodigy worth writing about. In the end, I never wrote about the prodigy. I wrote about something else entirely. I arrived early, as I always do when I want a table near the back and a clear sightline to the exits. The room was filling with the usual crowd, patrons in evening dress, a smattering of faculty in their better jackets, a handful of students trying to look as though they belonged. The Bursendorfer stood in the alcove at the far end of the room, a beautiful upright, dark and serious, the kind of instrument that seems to be waiting for something. A young man was crouched beside it when I came in, adjusting the action on the lower octaves with the focused economy of someone who had done this 100 times. He was perhaps 24, dark-haired, compactly built, wearing a plain white shirt and dark trousers that stopped just short of formal. He had the kind of hands you notice, broad across the knuckle, sure in their movement, and he worked without hurrying and without looking up. I took him for a tuner's assistant and thought nothing more of it. I found my table, poured my wine, and settled in to be professionally bored. Sir Edmund Crail arrived with the entrees and took the room with him. He was the sort of man who enters a space and immediately reorganizes it around himself, a senior adjudicator of 30 years standing, the head of the National Examination Board, the author of 3 books on musical pedagogy that I had read and admired in spite of himself. He was also, and I record this without pleasure, one of the most openly contemptuous men I have encountered in a field not short of contenders. He was generous with his opinions and frugal with his praise, and the combination had made him a figure of authority and a source of private dread among anyone who had ever sat before his panel. He spotted the young man still at the Bursendorfer, lingering now, one hand resting on the fallboard, looking at the keys with an expression I could not quite read from across the room. Crail watched him for a moment. Then, loudly enough to carry across 2 tables, he said, "Young man, do you actually play, or are you simply admiring the furniture?" There was a ripple of laughter. The young man looked up. He did not seem embarrassed. He seemed, if anything, thoughtful. "I play a little," he said, quiet, level, not defensive. "A little," Crail repeated it back with the patience of a man explaining something to a very slow child. "Well then, let us see what a little looks like." He raised his glass in a gesture that managed to be both an invitation and a dare, and the laughter around him rose a degree. "Play something worth hearing, and I'll stand up from this table and applaud you in front of everyone here. I give you my word on it." He said it the way a man says something he does not expect to be held to. "And if you can't, sit down and let the professionals use the instrument." I wrote the exchange in my notebook. I do that by instinct, any journalist does. I was not yet taking it seriously. The room had settled back into its conversations. Someone near me was discussing the conservatory's heating system. I poured more wine. The young man did not sit down. He looked at Crail for a moment with the expression of someone deciding something, and then he pulled out the bench and sat at the Bersendorfer. The room did not fall quiet immediately. People were mid-sentence, mid-bite, mid-glass. There was a moment, 5, perhaps 10 seconds, in which no one had quite registered what was happening. Then the first notes came, and something changed. He opened with the Rachmaninoff vocalese. If you know it is a piece that has no business being as difficult as it sounds. Or rather, it sounds simple until you try to play it and discover that its apparent simplicity is the most demanding thing it asks of you. It is, at its heart, a song without words, a melody that must sustain itself on the breath of the instrument alone, without the mercy of a human voice to carry it. In the hands of someone merely competent, it is agreeable. In the hands of someone who understands it, who knows where the grief lives in it, where the longing bends in the middle register, how the left hand must breathe underneath the right and never once overpower it, it becomes something else. It becomes the kind of music that reaches into a room and takes hold. He knew where the grief lived. The conversation stopped. Not all at once, they petered out, one by one, like lights going off in a building at the end of the day, until the hall was entirely dark except for the thing he was doing at the piano. I set my pen down. I did not pick it up again for a long time. The man beside me, one of the patrons, a property developer I had spoken to twice and liked not at all, had put his fork down and was sitting very still. 2 tables away, one of the faculty members had closed her eyes. Crail had not moved. He was watching the young man with an expression I could not immediately categorize. It was not the amusement of a few minutes earlier. It was not quite anything I had a ready name for. The vocalese ran perhaps 4 minutes. It did not conclude so much as arrive at a place, the final phrase settling like something that had been searching for its resolution and had finally found it. There was a breath of silence, the kind that follows a sentence you need a moment to absorb. And then, without pause, without announcement, without so much as a shift in his posture, the young man began to play something else. It was not Rachmaninoff. It was not anything I recognized, and I have spent 4 decades recognizing things. It was his own. That much was immediately clear. You can hear the difference between a musician performing a work and a musician doing something else, something more dangerous and more private. It began in the left hand, a slow, weighted figure in the low middle register, patient and iterative, like a question being turned over. The right hand arrived later and moved above it, not in melody exactly, but in something adjacent to melody. A series of phrases that circled and returned, that built in small increments, and then pulled back just at the moment you thought they were committed to crescendo. It took me perhaps 30 seconds to understand that I was in the presence of something extraordinary. It took me another 30 to understand that I had not felt this way, this particular variety of being entirely overtaken, in longer than I wanted to calculate. The music was not sentimental. It was not trying to please me. It was doing something I have never found a satisfactory word for, though I have spent 4 decades in the business of finding words for music. It was being honest, completely, uncomplicatedly, without defense or performance, honest, the way a person is honest when they think no one is listening. Except we were all listening, every person in that room. I looked across at Crail at some point in the middle of it, I cannot say exactly when, because time was not behaving quite normally, and found him no longer leaning back in his chair with his wine glass. He was sitting forward, both hands flat on the table, his face arranged in an expression I can only describe as reckoning. The kind of expression a man wears when something is costing him something. There was no amusement left in it. There was nothing easy left in it at all. The composition, and I am going to call it that, because the word composition is the only accurate one, ran perhaps 8 minutes in total. I could not have told you 4 minutes in whether it was 4 minutes old or 40. It moved through 3 distinct regions, the patient, searching opening, a middle passage that gathered itself and rose to something close to sorrow, not the performed sorrow of the concert stage, but the kind that sits in the chest without asking for acknowledgement, and then a final passage that did not so much resolve as release. The hand slowed. The left-hand figure, which had grounded everything, grew quieter and quieter, until the last chord, a wide, open voicing, neither major nor minor, neither here nor there, was held, and then was not, and the room held what remained in its place. No one moved. I have heard standing ovations build like storms, rapid and collective, the audience on its feet before the final note has decayed. That is one kind of silence breaking, and it is wonderful. But there is another kind, rarer and in my experience more significant, in which the silence that follows a performance is so complete and lasts so long that you begin to understand it as its own form of response. The room was doing that. 8 seconds, 12, 15, the chandelier, the portraits, the smell of the dinner cooling on the plates. Then a woman near the front began to applaud, and the room came loose from itself all at once, chairs scraping, people rising, the long, rolling sound of 200 hands. I was on my feet. I did not remember standing. The property developer beside me was on his feet. The faculty member who had closed her eyes was applauding with her hands held high. The students along the side wall, the ones who had been trying all evening to look as though they belonged, were on their feet and not trying to look like anything at all. The young man sat at the piano for a moment, his hands in his lap, looking at the keys. Then he stood. He did not take a bow exactly, he inclined his head, the way someone does when they are accepting something they are not sure how to hold. He looked calm. He looked, in fact, the way he had looked when he was adjusting the action of the instrument 2 hours earlier, focused, self-possessed, doing what he was there to do. I looked at Crail. He was the last man standing, the last person in the room to rise, and he rose slowly, the way a man rises when he is not doing it for show, when it is simply the only available response, and he has run out of alternatives. His hands came together, and he applauded. He did not look away from the young man at the piano. His expression was not humiliation exactly. It was something more considered than that. The expression of a man who has spent a long career making pronouncements about who belongs and who does not, and who has just been educated, gently but completely, about the limits of that enterprise. I found out later that the young man's name was Luca Deverl. He had grown up in the city, taught ballroom dancing to make ends meet while he worked part-time as an assistant to the conservatory's piano tuner. He had never enrolled in a music program, never sat an examination, never submitted a composition to anyone. He had simply played on whatever instrument was available since he was 7 years old, because it was the thing he knew how to do. He was 24. He had never performed in public before that evening. I spoke to him briefly afterward, in the corridor outside the dining room. He was carrying his tools in a canvas bag and did not seem particularly transformed by what had just occurred. I asked him where he had studied. "On my own," he said. He looked at me with a directness that was neither boastful nor falsely modest, mostly late at night when the rooms were empty. I asked him whether he had composed much. "A fair amount," he said. "I write things down when they arrive." I asked him, and I am aware this was a sentimental question, unworthy of 41 years of professional discipline, whether he knew how good he was. He thought about this for a moment. "I know when something's right," he said. "Whether that's the same thing, I couldn't say." I have replayed that answer many times in the 2 years since. I have found no quarrel with it. The conservatory did eventually offer Luca Deverl a scholarship, a full one, the following spring. I understand he is still there. I understand he is composing in earnest, and that the faculty treat whatever he produces with the kind of careful attention you give a thing you do not want to damage. Crail, for his part, kept his word. He stood. He applauded. He did not, as far as I know, say anything publicly about the evening, and I did not press him. A man who has spent 30 years as the authority on who is worth hearing deserves the privacy of his own reckoning, and I am not in the business of cruelty. I drove home that night along the river road, with the window down despite the October cold. I was not thinking about the dinner, or the column I would file, or anything much at all. I was thinking about the way the left-hand figure had moved in the middle section, patient and iterative, like a question being turned over, like something that had been waiting a long time for someone to give it a room. I have been to a great many evenings since. I have not stopped listening for that.